Welcome to another episode of the Sleeper Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Lehman. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already, please make sure to go over and leave a 5-star rating or review, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps a lot, and it's a great way to support the show. Also, make sure to follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Sleeper Dynasty. So our hand-drawn t-shirts and Sleeper Gang merch are 10% off right now when you use promo code FOOTBALL at sleeperdynasty.com. All right, so today we're talking Dynasty Fantasy Football Strategy. We're going to talk about all the different ways that you can try to win in your leagues. We're going to go over the pros and cons of 3 different types of strategies that you can use in your Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. But first, we got some news. A little update on Dak Prescott. This is from Adam Schefter. Dak Prescott said the reason why he was in a walking boot was that some soreness developed in his surgically repaired right ankle following 2 hard workouts. He was just being cautious as he was going on a vacation, but he does not anticipate it being an issue when training camp begins later this month. I will say now it's a little more concerning that he's trying to downplay it, but I really don't think it's that big of a deal. If we keep hearing about his ankle giving him issues in a month, if it's still bothering him, then I'll be like, all right, man. But I mean, an ankle, man, you can play on a hurt ankle. I mean, that's not a big deal. We also got some Gus Edwards hype. That's where we're at. We're at Gus Edwards hype right now. So Daniel Popper of the Athletic sees Gus Edwards as the clear lead back for the LA Chargers and predicts the current running back depth chart as this. Number 1, Gus Edwards. Number 2, J.K. Dobbins. Number 3, Kamani Vidal. Number 4, Isaiah Spiller. And then do the 5, Elijah Dotson. 6, Jarrett Patterson. Nobody even cares about those guys. This will be a sneaky pick for Dynasty, for any fantasy football leagues, really, redraft leagues especially. But yeah, if Gus Edwards is the lead back in a Harbaugh offense, he likes to run the ball. So yeah, man, Gus Edwards could have a huge season. I don't really think that J.K. Dobbins is always hurt. I mean, J.K. Dobbins is probably has the most upside of any of the running backs on that team, but I just don't trust that he's not going to get hurt. Yeah, Gus Edwards could be a sneaky, just try to trade for him on the low. I still wouldn't trade a second for him. I think that's a little too high, but maybe you throw a third out there for Gus Edwards. I don't even know if someone with Gus Edwards is willing to do that. Maybe. Let's look at the value. Let's go see. Let's go check out Keep Trade Cut right now. Gus Edwards is actually pretty close to Austin Eckler on this list. I find that kind of funny. Who would you rather have this year, Gus Edwards or Austin Eckler? That's an interesting one. Yeah, so he's around the same value as a 2024 early third. If I had a team that was competing this year, I think I would throw a third for Gus Edwards. I still don't really love Gus Edwards. I think I'd rather hold on to that third, to be honest with you. I'm trying to talk myself into spending the third, but his value is only going to go up if he's the lead back for the Chargers this year. All right, so enough about Gus Edwards. Let's get into the show. So the first strategy number 1. If you don't know a lot about Dynasty strategy, this show is for you. But even if you do know a lot about Dynasty Fantasy Football, this episode could still be useful for you because there is one method in here that you may not know about. Maybe you have seen it before. I don't know, but it may be something new for you. So still listen to the show. All right, so the first strategy in Dynasty Fantasy Football is the win now strategy. I'm labeling each one of these as high risk, low risk. This strategy is very high risk in my opinion. So this strategy has a focus on scoring points over team value. So you're very much in the numbers as far as points per game, trying to find the most efficient players for each spot on your roster, right? You're trying to fill out kind of like a redraft league. When you're playing redraft, you're not trying to find young players. You're trying to find the players who are going to score you the most points so that you can win. That's basically what you're doing, is you're bringing your redraft method over to the dynasty space, and you're trying to take advantage of people who are trying to get younger rosters by getting an edge on getting depth with players that can score more points. The one thing about this strategy is that normally you're drafting older vets, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you drafted Christian McCaffrey even like 2 years ago, like he's someone who's going to be older, but he's still someone who's going to be winning you leagues, right? So it pays off sometimes. I will say my first couple years in Dynasty Fantasy Football, this was my strategy personally. It was, how can I take advantage of other people? How can I take advantage of this game? Because I was coming over from the redraft space. So it was like, how can I take advantage of this? And the way I saw it was like, all right, I'm going to go late round QB, just like I do in my redraft leagues. And I'm going to just fill out a stacked vet roster. Another thing about this strategy is that there is a first year advantage for winning a championship. Usually there's a money focus, like in big money leagues, you have more win now league mates. They're trying to win that money. They're trying to bring it home. I mean, I would too if I'm winning like 1,000 plus. Like, yeah, I'm gonna try to win that league. So totally get that. Another thing about this strategy is you're more likely to trade away your draft picks for players. You're trying to convert, take advantage of those people who look too much at age, and you're trying to convert that into point score for your roster. Another thing when you're in this strategy is that you are making a complete roster to optimize your scoring. You're not trying to, for example, like not draft a quarterback or not draft enough quarterbacks. Like you need to make sure you have, if you're in a Superflex league, you need to make sure you have 3 starting quarterbacks so that if one goes down or if you have a bye week, like you're trying to optimize the scoring, right? Now let's get into some of the cons. Let's get into some of the cons of this strategy. So because your players are older, they're going to be constantly falling in value. There's not a way for players to rise in value. For example, if you have Christian McCaffrey right now, he's not going up in value. If you have Devontae Adams right now, he's not going up in value. They're at a point in their career where they're only going to go down. If you have Mike Evans, he's only going to go down. Keenan Allen, all these guys that can score points who are older. Those are some players that you might like for this strategy, but their value will go down and you run the risk of their value just bottoming out, like going to zero. Austin Eckler fell off a cliff after last year. He could regain some value, but I'm just saying that's the example, right? Also, a con is that the reason that this is high risk is because if you have one of your main players gets an injury, for example, Christian McCaffrey, right? I keep saying Christian McCaffrey. He's like the biggest win now player I can think of. But if you have Christian McCaffrey or you have Devontae Adams, the players that are older, if they get injured, the more likely their career is going to bottom out, right? And that's why their value is as low as it is. I always think of it like, think of a player's value as if they got an injury, like an Achilles tear, what would their value be next year? So, for example, last year, if you had Nick Chubb, value just bottomed out, right? Like he was worth a first at the beginning of the season because he's one of the best running backs in the league. But as soon as he got a major injury, he becomes useless, like literally useless. Nobody wants him because he's so old. If you're a win now team, you're not trying to trade for him last year because he got an injury and you don't know if his career is going to continue forward. So he's one of those players where his value just dropped. Another con is that players who play like this, like your league mates who use this strategy, they're more likely to bail on a league. So if they are using this high risk strategy, it doesn't work out, they're gone. That's not always the case, but that's just something I've noticed. Rookie drafts are also less fun if you play this way. because you are more likely to be shelling, you're selling, not shelling, you're selling that draft capital. So you're less likely to have a first round pick in your rookie draft. And that's just not fun when we're all getting hyped up about rookies in the off season. That's just not fun. And another thing is that you're not able to use your bench to grow value because you're rostering players with higher points scored. And those are usually vets. So for example, if you're trying to build value, you don't care about putting guys on your team like Gus Edwards, right? You want players that are more likely to explode in value. You want the next Pukas, right? Like you want a guy that you can just pull off the waiver, who you can sit on your bench, and if they're like lottery picks, if they go up in value, you can either hold on to them, like I'm hoping you did if Puka went off, or you can sell them immediately just to gain the value. So that's another thing. So all in all, I consider this a very high risk strategy, but you can win some money. The second strategy. So this strategy was actually inspired by a league mate of mine who is in 90% of the leagues with me. His name's Trev. So this strategy specifically is called the tank like Trev strategy. I don't know if a lot of people do this in Dynasty Fantasy Football, but it's really fun to do. And I've done it in a couple leagues, and it's just a way that like you can really have a bad time if you're one of those people who just likes to win. But this is where you kind of just fall in love with the dynasty part of fantasy football. So if you were a win now team and your team value fell off a cliff, you can use the tank like Trev strategy. This is a very, very long-term strategy. It's going to take a couple years, possibly. It could go faster than that, depending on how it goes. So basically the point of this strategy is selling all the players on your team, all the players, every single one, for draft capital. So you sell all players to create bench space, and that maximizes potential for player growth so that you can have more lottery tickets. So you're really using that space only for value increase. You're not using it. You don't want players who are scoring points. You actually don't want players who are scoring points. You want the value going up. Most of the time, if you have a player like a rookie or a second-year player who are scoring, they're going to be scoring more points, not a lot of points, but enough for their value to be shooting up, right? That's how it works. So the reason you do this method is because when you sell all of your players for picks, you're going to end up with high draft capital, okay? High draft capital and a lot of draft capital, okay? So it is very fun when the rookie season comes around and you have like half of the first round is just you, especially this year. Like if you can imagine, you're getting multiple quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. You're getting multiple wide receivers, potentially Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors. You're getting, Jonathan Brooks, Brock Bowers. If you got all of that first round draft capital and you just stocked up, that could be your potential team for the future. And you would be stacked, right? Because those players are really valuable right now. We don't know how that's going to pan out in the future, but what history tells us is that the higher the draft capital, the higher the ADP, the more likely they are to pan out as fantasy players, to score fantasy points. That's just the way it goes. And we're getting better. I feel like we're getting better as a community with ADP in trying to in getting these picks right. We still get a lot of them wrong, but we're getting better. Another pro about this strategy is that you have more of a willingness to make trades, right? Because if you have a player rise in value, you're going to flip them. You're just constantly like, you want this guy, you want that guy, you want this guy. Like you're trying to flip players for more value because a lot of win now teams, they're trying to trade away their draft capital, and you can capitalize on that, right? So this strategy is capitalizing on a league filled with a couple win now teams and making sure you identify those teams so that you can go after their draft capital. That's the point of this strategy. All right, so I identified this strategy as high risk as well. And these are some of the reasons why. If the league dies, which a lot of Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues, unfortunately, they die within the first couple of years, right? Because you don't have a good squad, you don't have a good community, you're not, people aren't active, people aren't trading. It's just, people are just kind of checking their phones every once in a blue moon. It dies, you're screwed. I had this literally happen to Trevor in one of my leagues. It was our league of record. The league ended up folding because there was some sketchy stuff going on. I'll leave that story for a later day. And Trev had the entire first round for the 2023 draft. And we had to cancel that league because of somebody was cheating. And unfortunately, he lost all of it. Another con with this strategy is that if multiple teams are using this same strategy, then it doesn't work as well. If you have multiple people who are trading their entire rosters to try to get draft capital, obviously there's going to be a limited amount of draft capital that you can trade for, right? Because you're not going to get the entire first round if multiple people are doing it. If you have 3 guys in your league who are trying to get all the draft capital in the league, then it's limited. And honestly, it's going to limit the amount of growth that you can have because you're capped at the amount of value you can gain. There is no chance of winning a championship with this strategy because when you trade away all of your older players, all of your vets, all of your players with any value for draft capital, you don't have a team to score points. You're actually scoring the least amount of points in the league. So that is why this strategy is high risk as well. It's risky because the fact that dynasty leagues do die out. And for the first couple years, you're not winning a championship for sure. For sure. You also have less of a flexibility to change your strategy if you're in this mode. You're not going to be as willing to trade for vets like Gus Edwards, like Austin Eckler this year. You're not going to want to give players like that a shot because you don't want those points on your team. You're trying to score the least amount of points for the highest draft capital. So that's another reason why you're locked in. You're locked in with these strategies, with the win now strategy and the tank like Trev strategy. You're locked in to going one specific direction. All right, so the third strategy in Dynasty Fantasy Football is value stacking. This is my favorite way of playing Dynasty. The focus is to get the best player available, best assets for your Dynasty team. So to do that, most of the time you're drafting younger players. Always younger players. You're definitely not drafting the older vets. So you're actually selling those older vets for draft picks. Kind of similar to the tanking method, but we're not shelling out. We're not selling out our entire team. In this strategy, you have more flexibility to make trades because you're flexible to trade with both of the other strategies in your leagues. You're willing to trade with the win now teams to take their draft capital, and you're also willing to trade with the tanking teams so that you can pull some of the good scoring players off of their rosters and give them either younger players so that they can build a future or draft capital. You're competitive for the long term in this strategy. So you may not be competitive immediately. Maybe you don't fill a complete roster, but you don't need to be competitive immediately because over time, if you keep stacking the value, you will be dominant. And that's the strategy here is dominance in your Dynasty League. There's also less risk for injuries. Even if you do have players that get injured, they're younger and they can bounce back. I think if your entire league uses this strategy, then it really does lead to just better leagues, right? Because people are more flexible to make trades, they're more active, they're more focused on the longevity of the league, right? And that just leads to a better community, right? That's what Dynasty is for. Well, that's what I believe Dynasty is for. Dynasty is all about community. It's taking the redraft version of fantasy football and it's bringing in 12 guys to a league or girls and talking with people on a daily basis, right? Talking with people about the news, getting excited. Like that's what Dynasty is. We're trying to like find people to talk to about our passion for football. Another thing with this method is that rookie drafts are fun because you have the draft capital. You're stacking value. Maybe you don't have a bunch of first round picks like the tank like Trev method, but you have a couple seconds, a couple thirds. You get the guys you want every year that fall in your drafts. Maybe you get an extra first, because you capitalize on some value. I mean, you have fun. You're not dominating your rookie draft, but you're getting the guys you want, and you have the draft capital to move up if you want to. And I keep saying flexibility, right? But another thing about this strategy is that you have the flexibility to either trade for players that you want to either score points, or you have the flexibility to trade for players who are going to go up in value, right? Now, let's get into some of the cons. You're not going to be competitive immediately. And if the league crumbles, then you wasted money and time. You have less points scored immediately because of that. And this is mostly because you may have incomplete roster construction. So you're missing positional players. So when you're in your startup draft using this method, maybe you draft, for example, I did this a lot last year. You draft one early quarterback, but then you really believe in a deeper guy, right? So say last year, I really believed in Jordan Love last year. I'm a Packers fan. Like I believed that the value would at least rise on him. And it did. So if you started a draft with, say, Lamar Jackson in the first or any other of your first round quarterbacks, and then you had a later pick on Jordan Love, well, there you go. You got two staples for your team. But the only issue with that is that it's going to take some time. You're not going to have immediate success because you don't have that complete roster construction. Another thing you could do with this strategy is stack up on wide receivers are so valuable in Dynasty. So why don't you just stack up a bunch of like stud young wide receivers? They do not lose their value. They don't. And so to be honest, the best startup strategy is probably to get those young stud wide receivers, get those young stud staple quarterbacks, and then maybe punt with running backs. Because if you punt the position with running backs, you could just draft running backs the next year. And running backs don't normally go up in value, right? They don't, unless you're drafting rookie running backs that break out, right? So, which most of the time, if you're in a startup, those rookie or younger running backs that are going to break out are going pretty soon. So just wait for the next year to get running backs. Just wait. So that's a con with this strategy, is that you're not going to have a complete roster sometimes if you go too far with, oh, I'm only going to get the best asset for my team. Another con, I fall into this a lot. It's when you just want to keep stacking value. The point of stacking value is to eventually convert it into points scored so that you can actually win your leagues. If you don't ever do that, then you just have a stud roster that everybody's like, oh, he's so good, but you just never win, right? So at some point, if you get an injury on your team and you have a stacked roster, which you will if you're using this method, if you lose a tight end right before the playoffs, sometimes you got to cash in. Like, you got to cash in to win. So that's something I get lost in, is that I'm always, stock market value going up, capitalize on the value, sell. Sometimes you need to hold on to those guys. Like, for example, Puka. If you got him with a late round rookie pick last year, you're not cashing out on Puka. He is a staple for your team to score points. So as much as it might be nice to sell him for some future draft capital, that's someone that you need to hold on to your team. Just an example. That's going to wrap it up for today's pod. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please make sure to go leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on, and make sure to subscribe. It really helps the show a lot. I appreciate it. It pushes me to keep pushing out content. Also, check out the shop, sleeperdynasty.com. We got a bunch of cool tees like this Jordan Love t-shirt behind me. Use promo code football for 10% off. Follow us on our social media platforms, X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Sleeper Dynasty. Peace.